The Champion Nobody Wanted to Be, Part 1, November 24th, 1968. The match ended at 4 minutes and 11 seconds into the second round. Chuck Norris had won it with a combination he had drilled 10,000 times, a feint left that brought Delgado's guard fractionally high, a movement so small it registered as barely perceptible to the crowd, but registered as a window to Chuck's trained and particular attention, and then the technique, fast and precise and exactly where it needed to be. The judges' paddles went up. The announcer said the words. The crowd in the Long Beach Sports Arena made the sound that crowds make when something expected and also, somehow still surprising, has occurred. Chuck stood in the center of the floor. He was 28 years old. He had been chasing this specific result for 4 years, since his first tournament in 1964, since the losses that had come one after another, in the way that losses do when you are learning a thing rather than performing it, since the 7th loss when he had sat in a parking lot for 40 minutes and answered the question about whether he still wanted this even if winning was never going to be available to him. The result was available to him now. It was, in the language of the sport, confirmed. Luis Delgado, the same Luis Delgado who had given Chuck his 10th and final loss earlier that same year, who had been, for 4 years, the benchmark Chuck had been training toward without knowing it, was shaking his hand with the matter-of-fact professionalism of a man who loses with the same composure he wins with. The referee raised Chuck's hand. The crowd made it sound again. Chuck's eyes found Diane in the third row. She was standing, her hands clasped in front of her face, in the specific posture of someone who has been holding tension for a long time and has just felt it release and doesn't quite know yet what to do with the absence of it. He saw the expression on her face and thought about everything that expression was the evidence of. The years, the schools, the early mornings at 5, the utility bills and the payment plans and the sleeping bags, and the particular quality of Tuesday evening conversations when the math didn't work, and they were deciding anyway. He raised his hand, palm out, in the direction where she was standing. Then he turned away from the crowd before the thing that was happening in his chest reached his face. He walked to the edge of the floor. He picked up his equipment bag. He found the corridor that led to the locker rooms, and he walked down it with the controlled pace of someone who is maintaining a specific quality of self-possession and is concentrating hard on maintaining it. He made it to the locker room. He sat on the bench, and he put his face in his hands, and he cried. Woodwinist, Part 2, What Happened in the Locker Room. He had not expected to cry. This would have seemed to him, if he had thought about it in advance, inconsistent with the moment. Crying at the achievement of a goal was the response of someone for whom the goal was the primary object, and he had been telling himself for years that winning was not the primary object, that the primary object was the practice, that the wins were the evidence of the practice rather than the purpose of it. What he had not accounted for was Wieland. Wieland was 24 years old and stationed in South Korea with the 101st Airborne, which meant that he was alive and 7,000 miles away and had been calling when he could, a call every 3 weeks or so, on the days when the base's phone lines were available and the time difference aligned with an hour that was reasonable in California. The last call had been 2 weeks ago, on a Sunday afternoon, and they had talked for 11 minutes. Chuck had timed it because the calls were sometimes cut short without notice, and he had taken to noting the time when they started so he knew how long he had had. 11 minutes. Wieland had asked about the tournament. Are you ready? Wieland had said. I think so, Chuck had said. You're ready, Wieland had said. Not as reassurance, as a fact, in the way that Wieland always stated what he believed, with a directness that contained neither performance nor doubt. You sound certain, Chuck had said. I am certain, Wieland had said. You've been ready for a year. The tournament is just when you prove it. Sitting in the locker room in Long Beach with his face in his hands, Chuck thought about that phone call and understood something that he had not understood during it. That Wieland had known he would win the way Wieland knew the things he knew, with a completeness that had nothing to do with evidence, that preceded evidence, that was simply the shape of his certainty about the people he loved. And Wieland was not here to see it, not because he was dead. He was alive, in Korea, 24 years old, with the serene certainty that was his most defining characteristic. But not here, not in row 3, not in the building, not in any position to have watched the 4 minutes and 11 seconds of the second round and known, in the moment of knowing it, that the thing he had been certain about had resolved into reality. Chuck had been building toward this moment for 4 years. He had imagined it in various forms during those 4 years. The win, the acknowledgement, the confirmation of everything the losses had been the other side of. He had never imagined the specific quality of the win's arrival, which was not what he had imagined. He had imagined arrival as a conclusion. What arrival actually was, sitting in this locker room, face in hands, was an opening into everything the win was connected to, everyone it was made of, all the material that had gone into it that was not just him. The material included Wieland. The win included Wieland. Wieland, who had called 3 weeks ago and said, "You're ready," with a certainty that was not hope or wish, but knowledge. Wieland, who was 24 years old in Korea, and who had said at 12, with the same quality of certainty, "I won't live to see 28. Wieland, who was alive and 7,000 miles away, and who would not know he was right, that the championship had landed exactly where he said it would, until the next phone call in 3 weeks. And by then the specific moment would have passed, and moments pass, and the passing is irrevocable. Chuck sat in the locker room and cried for about 4 minutes. Then he stopped, washed his face at the sink, and went back out to find Diane. Part 3. What he told Diane. He told her almost none of it that night. They went to dinner with 3 other couples, his training partners and their wives, at an Italian restaurant on 6th Street that they had been planning this celebration for 6 weeks. The celebration was warm and genuine, and Chuck was present for it in the way that he was capable of being present for things, completely, without division, with the full attention that was his most consistent quality. He talked about the match. He talked about Delgado's adjustment in the second round and the specific moment when he had seen the window. He talked about the training, about what the last 6 months of preparation had required and what it had produced. He ate and drank and laughed and was exactly what the evening called for him to be. Diane watched him across the table with the particular quality of attention she brought to the things she was uncertain about, assessing rather than enjoying, present but also slightly aside from the present. She knew the locker room had happened. He had told her in the car on the way to the restaurant. "I cried." In the locker room, he had said it without explanation, as a fact that he thought she should have, and she had received it without question, which was one of the specific things about Diane that he had understood more clearly every year. She asked later, in the quiet of the drive home with the boys asleep in the back seat and the Long Beach streets going past in their ordinary nighttime manner. What was it about? He was quiet for a moment. Wieland, he said. She was quiet for a longer moment. Because he wasn't there. Because he couldn't see it happen in real time, Chuck said. "I know that sounds..." "No," Diane said. "It doesn't sound anything. It's true." He drove for a while. "I've been building toward this specific moment for 4 years, and when it arrived, the first thing that happened was that I understood all the people who were part of the building, everyone who had something to do with it getting to that floor tonight. And Wieland was at the top of that list in a way I hadn't quite seen clearly until tonight. He believed in you before you believed in yourself," Diane said. "Before I had any reason to believe in myself," Chuck said. "He's been certain about this longer than I have. And tonight was the thing he's been certain about arrived tonight, and he was 7,000 miles away. Diane looked out the window at the passing streets. "Call him tomorrow," she said. "Yes," Chuck said. They drove the rest of the way in the particular silence of people who have said what needed to be said and are now simply being together with it, which was its own kind of communication. Part 4. The question he could not answer. The call to Wieland happened 3 days later, on a Wednesday, which was the earliest date that both the base's phone availability and the time difference made accessible. Wieland answered on the second ring, which meant he had been near the phone or expecting the call or both. His voice had the particular quality it always had on the calls, not strained, not performed, simply present, the same voice as in person without the physical body that usually accompanied it. "You won," Wieland said, not a question. Chuck had not had to say anything. "How did you know?" Chuck said. "Because I was right about you," Wieland said. They talked for 17 minutes, which was the longest call they had managed since the previous spring. Chuck told him about the match, the feint, the window, the 4 minutes and 11 seconds. Wieland listened without interrupting, which was his way, and asked 2 questions when Chuck was done. What Delgado had done differently in the second round, and whether Chuck had felt afraid before the match. Before every match, Chuck said, "Good," Wieland said. "Why good?" "Because it means you're paying attention to what's real. If you weren't afraid, you'd be paying attention to the idea of the match rather than the match itself." He paused. "Fear is information. You know this." "I know it," Chuck said. "It's easier to know when things are going well." "Yes," Wieland said. "That's the test of whether you actually know it." They talked about the base, about the food, about a man in Wieland's unit who was from Georgia and who had an inexhaustible supply of opinions about everything, and who was, in Wieland's considered judgment, approximately 60% correct on any given subject, which Wieland said was better than the average. Near the end of the call, in the final 2 or 3 minutes when both of them could feel the time running down, Wieland said, "I've been thinking about what comes next for you." "What do you mean?" "You've been the person trying to become champion for 4 years. Now you're the champion. Those are different things. The training that made you the first one will maintain you in the second one, but the thing you're trying to do is different." He paused. "What are you competing for now?" Chuck thought about this. He thought about it with the seriousness it deserved, which was the seriousness Wieland's questions always deserved. "To not lose what I have," he said. "That's defense," Wieland said. "Defense is fine. But defense without something you're moving toward, that gets brittle. What are you moving toward?" The question stayed with Chuck after the call ended. He wrote it down in the notebook he kept on the office desk, not the training log, the other one, the one where he wrote the things he was working out rather than the things he had already resolved. What are you moving toward? He did not have an immediate answer. He had a title, and he had the school, and he had Diane and the boys, and the specific satisfaction of having arrived at a place he had been building toward for 4 years. All of these were real. None of them individually was a direction. He trained the next morning at 5, and the morning after that, and the morning after that, turning the question over in the way you turn things over when you don't want to rush the answer because the answer needs to be the right one rather than the fast one. Part 5. The answer. He found it 3 weeks later, in a class. He had 17 students by December of 1968, and the afternoon sessions were full, and the Saturday morning sessions were beginning to attract students from neighboring areas who had heard about the school through the tournament coverage in the local martial arts community. The school had been building steadily since 1963, and the championship result, reported in the sports trade publications, circulated through the network of practitioners, had accelerated the building in the specific way that external validation always does, not by changing the quality of what was there, but by making it visible to people who needed the external signal before they could see what they had been looking for. The class on the Wednesday afternoon, 3 weeks after the championship, contained, among its 17 participants, a 14-year-old boy named Samuel Torres, who had been training for 3 months and who was struggling with a sequence in the intermediate form in a way that Chuck had been watching with specific attention for 2 weeks. The struggle was not about effort. Samuel Torres applied effort to everything with a consistency that suggested it was a native quality rather than a cultivated one. The struggle was about something more fundamental. He could not feel the sequence. He could execute the individual movements correctly in isolation. When he ran them together, something in the connection between them was not present, and the sequence, which should have been continuous, arrived instead as a series of stops. Chuck watched this for 2 weeks without saying anything, which was an instructional choice rather than an oversight. He was watching what the student did with the struggle, which was more instructive than addressing the struggle directly. What Samuel Torres did with the struggle was to keep showing up. He did not adjust the sequence to avoid the difficulty. He ran the full sequence every time and experienced the stopping and ran it again. On the Wednesday, 3 weeks after the championship, Chuck interrupted the class during the sequence work and asked Samuel to run it alone in front of the others. Samuel did, with the effort and the stopping and the not quite rightness that had been there for 3 months. When he finished, Chuck said, "What are you thinking about when you run it?" Samuel thought, "The movements," he said, "whether I'm doing them correctly. And when you think about the movements, what happens to the space between them?" A pause. "It disappears," Samuel said. Then, in the tone of someone hearing something they had not known they knew, "Oh." "The space between the movements is the movement," Chuck said. "The sequence is not the positions. The sequence is the transitions. The transitions are where the form lives." He looked at Samuel. "Run it again, but this time think about nothing, just move." Samuel ran it. The stopping was still there, but different, less total, more of a hesitation than a halt. The direction was correct. Chuck looked at the class, at the 17 faces watching this exchange with the particular quality of students watching something that is applicable to them, recognizing it, taking it in, measuring it against their own practice. He understood something, standing in front of this class on this December afternoon, that answered Wieland's question. What he was moving toward was not the next title or the next win or the next external confirmation of the practice. What he was moving toward was this: the moment when something in a student resolves, when the understanding moves from the head to the body, when the thing they have been working on for weeks suddenly becomes the thing they are doing, rather than the thing they are trying to do. He had been a student for 9 years and a teacher for 5, and he understood, looking at Samuel Torres's face after the second run of the sequence, that teaching was the advanced version of learning, and that what you could give a student when the understanding arrived was the specific thing that the understanding felt like to them, so that they would recognize it when it came again in a different form. This was what he was moving toward. The championship was the evidence of the work. The work was in this room, with these 17 people, on a Wednesday afternoon in December, in the space between the movements where the sequence actually lived. Part 6, the year of defending. He defended the title 4 times in 1969. Each defense was different from the others in its specifics, different opponents, different conditions, different weights of pressure, and the same as the others in the essential thing, which was that he arrived prepared, competed with full capacity, and won. The press covered him with the particular quality of coverage that attaches to the unbeatable, a mixture of genuine admiration and the slightly baffled quality of observers watching something exceed the frame they had prepared for it. He won the title in 1970 and 1972 and 1973, which completed what the records would eventually call 6 consecutive years undefeated. None of the subsequent wins had the specific quality of November 24, 1968. None of them had the locker room, the 4 minutes of crying, the specific weight of being the person who has been trying to arrive somewhere for 4 years and has suddenly arrived. They had other qualities. They had the quality of confidence, which is different from the quality of arrival. They had the quality of a man who knew what he was doing and was doing it well, which is a sustained and workmanlike quality, less dramatic than a rival, but more reliable, more useful, more like what the actual practice of anything worthy of practice feels like over time. He called Wieland after each one. The calls continued through 1969 and into 1970 until June, when they stopped because there was no Wieland to call. He was 26 and stationed in Vietnam when he died at Firebase Ripcord, 1 month before his 27th birthday, 2 years before the age he had always said he would not reach. Olga, what the championship was for. Chuck did not compete for the championship in 1974. He had won it in 1973 for what he understood was the last time, not because he was diminished or injured or afraid of losing it, but because there was no one left to beat for it, which is the best reason to stop competing, and also the rarest. He walked away undefeated at 34, having held the title for 6 years, in the way that things end when they have run their proper length. He stood in the dojo in Torrance on the day he decided this was the year, and he thought about the moment in Long Beach in 1968. The floor, Delgado's hand, the judges' paddles, the crowd, and then the locker room, the 4 minutes, Wieland's name arriving in the space of having won the way names arrive, when you understand that winning is never done alone. He thought about Wieland's question. What are you moving toward? He had found the answer in the class 3 weeks after the championship, and he had been moving toward it ever since, the moment of understanding in a student's face, the day the sequence resolves, the specific, irreplaceable experience of watching a person become what they have been working toward. He had trained over 325 students to black belt by the time he retired. 325 people who understood in their bodies something that they had not understood before they walked into one of his rooms. Each of those understandings was its own championship. None of them made noise. None of them had judges' paddles. None of them would be recorded in the sports press or cited in the martial arts trade publications. All of them were what November 24, 1968 had been for. He understood this now. He had understood it since the December afternoon with Samuel Torres, but he understood it more completely now, at 34, with the perspective of 6 years additional evidence. The championship in Long Beach was not the destination. It was the moment when the destination became visible, when he could see, from the elevation of having arrived at one specific peak, where the actual country was that he had been moving through. The country was the school was the room was the 17 students and the 325 students and the ones still coming, and the question about the space between the movements and the face of someone when they finally understand. The championship was the proof that he knew enough to teach. Wieland had known that before him. He had always known that.